r/Nosleep. Posted by you/mylifesfuck21. If you hear tapping on your window, she's found you. Up until yesterday I've never heard of the whimpering woman. I was at my friend Dan's house, drinking a couple of beers with him because he's been very depressed this past week and a half. I was there to try and find out what's been wrong with him, and why he's been so distant. We're normally hanging out all the time doing fun stuff. Lately however, he's been ignoring my text and calls, and if he does answer he's just consistently declining my offers of fun things to do. I don't feel like it, I'm just gonna hang at home, he says in a monotone voice before ending the call abruptly. So yesterday I showed up at his house with a fifth of vodka and a 12-pack. Dan's never been able to decline a fun night of drinking, and when he answered the door and saw me standing in his porch with booze, he smiled and invited me in. Halfway through the fifth and 3 beers later, I finally asked him what's been going on. He let out a deep sigh. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Kevin." I felt upset that my own best friend didn't think I'd trust him. "Dude, come on, you're my best friend. Of course I'll believe you," I assured him. He sat there silent for a minute, obviously debating on telling me. Finally, after another heavy sigh he shook his head. "Yes. You're right, besides, I gotta tell someone." His eyes began to water. I figured the vodka was beginning to kick in. "From here on out I'll just tell you guys as if Dan's telling the story, it'll be easier. A week or two ago I was over at this girl's house that I met at Schmitty's, our local bar. She was this cute gothic type and seemed like a ton of fun. She was bubbly yet cocky, she knew she was hot and wasn't afraid to show it. Anyways, after an hour or two of us hitting it off she invited me back to her place. Of course I accepted. 20 minutes later we were walking up the porch to this huge house just outside of town. Her nearest neighbor was at least 3 football fields away, so it was way more secluded than I'm used to. Anyway, once we get inside we start making out and things are going great, better than great actually. After one of our pauses to breath I happen to notice all of her windows are blacked out with these thick, black curtains that were nailed to her window frames. There was no way to open these curtains, so I asked her about it. She got all weird and told me it was nothing, that she didn't like the sun. Then she quickly started kissing me again, trying to distract me from questioning her again. Of course it worked. We had some of the wildest, nastiest sex you could possibly have. I think she even made me spit in her mouth at one point. I laughed pretty hard at that. Anyways, we're laying in her bed panting, and I happen to look over and notice all of bedroom windows are blocked off just like all of her other ones. "Seriously though, what's with the windows?" I asked curiously. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, like she was thinking of what to say. "I don't want the whimpering woman to get me," she whispers, and her voice cracks as if she's about to cry. "The whimpering woman?" I asked confused. I looked over and noticed a tear running down her face. She looked at me with watery eyes, and nodded yes. She must have seen the confusion on my face because she started to explain. "You'll know she's found you when you hear tapping on your windows at night. Once she does find you, she'll never leave you alone." She looked like she was staring off into space, as tears rolled down her face. I was pretty confused, and very creeped out. I changed the subject and made some lame excuse to go home. I didn't want to stay and hang out with a crazy woman, so I got the hell out of Dodge. I couldn't stop thinking about her story for the whole next day, and when night came I was pretty nervous. It was at this point I looked around and somehow just noticed that all of Dan's windows were covered with dark curtains, stapled shut. I sat in bed jumping at every creak the house made. Finally around 1 in the morning I must have dozed off, because next thing I know I'm sitting up panting, sweat rolling down my forehead. The house is completely quiet, and my senses are on high alert. I have this wave of dread wash over me like I've never felt. Then I hear it. Soft tapping on my window. A soft whimpering came immediately after from outside my bedroom window. My heart literally leaps into my throat. My adrenaline pumping so bad I can feel my heartbeat in my ears. I tried to calm myself down so I could focus on listening. After a minute or two I calmed down enough that my heartbeat isn't drowning out every other noise, so I creep to window as quietly as possible. I look out expecting to see someone in my yard, but it's empty. I let out a sigh of relief and walk back to bed. I chuckle a little and convince myself it was just my imagination, that I was in between sleep and consciousness. It works and I cover up with blankets and roll over. I'm still a little spooked so I cover my head with the blankets. Just as I'm about to doze off, I hear it again. Only this time it's much closer. It sounded like it came from right outside my window. I completely froze, paralyzed with fear. I listened as the whimpering louder and louder. Then I heard something I'll never forget, the sound of my window sliding open. I'd never been so afraid my life, man. I wanted to run out my room, my house, but I couldn't. I couldn't move, I was so scared. Either that it was my instinct telling me not to move a muscle, not to even look at her. There was a soft thud, followed by another. I'm assuming it was her feet hitting my floor. Her whimpering sounded like she was in pure agony, like she was completely heartbroken. It honestly made me feel sad too. Still, I didn't move a muscle. The floor creaked after each thud of her footsteps, as she slowly made her way to my bed. I thought my heart was going to explode, it was beating so hard. I listened as she walked right up to my bed, then stopped. The house was more quiet than I've ever heard in my life, so quiet that almost made my eardrums explode. She wasn't whimpering, or moving, or anything. After what felt like an eternity, I felt the last thing on earth I wanted to feel in that moment. My bed sunk in right beside me as she got in bed next to me. Her face pressed in right into the back of my neck. I was getting goosebumps, looking over my shoulder paranoid. She started breathing rapidly, like she was overly excited. I honestly thought I was gonna die. Then, by the grace of God, she climbed out of my bed and it sounded like she scrambled like a wild animal to the window and left. I almost thought it was a trap, a ploy to get me to come out from under the covers. I hid under the blankets for hours. At some point I must have passed out from pure exhaustion because next thing I know I'm flailing in bed to my alarms blasting. That's why my windows are covered. I saw that girl do it, so I think it at least keeps her out of my room at night. I still hear her whimper, every single night. Right outside my window. She hasn't come in my room since that first night though. I sat looking at Dan in complete shock. I didn't have any words that would come out of my mouth, let alone make him feel better. I could tell he wasn't messing with me. He was telling the truth, and there wasn't any way I could help him. After 20 minutes of awkward silence, he asked me if I minded leaving him before the night. I apologized about his situation and gave him a hug goodbye. I hate to admit it, but I didn't want to be there any longer either. I was spooked. I spent the rest of that night jumping at every little noise I heard. A little after midnight I put my phone down and attempted to sleep. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. A soft tapping coming from outside my window.